Are we rolling? Oh, okay. Everything seems to be working properly, huh? The microphones are rigged and all of that. Okay, I'll give you a 3, 2, 1 count. In 3, 2, 1. First of all, for those of you who might be watching this on Channel 18, my apologies to you. And also a sort of a unique thing, Sarah. This will be our first tape-recorded interview firing up the new cable channel. And as you can see, the light is not going to be right. We still don't have our lights in. We're using what basically is a field camera and set up here that probably looks fairly good to you, but everybody in here knows that this room looks like a junk pile. But you've been in enough TV studios to know that they all look like junk piles.
Looks very neat to me.
Okay, so in any event, our guest is Sarah McClendon, and I was out of the country, I think down at Bonaire when you came through here the last time, but I listened to the tape and it was a delightful thing, and I thought...
I remember there was one important man missing that day, and they said he was away, so it must have been you.
They considered me important? They will deny that now. This is Sarah McClendon. Sarah was born in Tyler, Texas. My record showed July the 8th, 1910.
That's
now,
right.
Pete Jennings, in his report, said your birthday was yesterday, which Pete missed it a little bit.
Well, at one time he said it was about the early part of the month.
Yeah.
So that's very good.
In any event, at the day this is being taped, and by the way, since we're going to delay it for the television thing, on the day this was being taped, you were 80 plus 20, and today is July the 28th, and so we would not kid you on that. Some of the things that we may go into could be a little bit old by the time this happens, but right now, first of all, I was given by the staff a piece of copy that came from Associated Press. Says, hard-hitting reporter Sarah McClendon. I was calling you the Dragon Lady of presidential press conferences. They cleaned it up a little bit. Hard-hitting reporter Sarah McClendon, who's covered every president since Franklin Roosevelt. They could have phrased that better, you know. Says she's not letting up now that she has turned 80. McClendon says she's not quitting because she has a lot of questions she wants to ask George Bush. Bush was among many who sent congratulations yesterday, whenever that was, at McClendon's birthday party in Washington, D.C. Let me jump ahead. We probably are going to be playing cafeteria stuff. What do you want to ask George Bush?
Oh, I want to ask him one thing about what he's going to do with all these surplus weapons that we will have since we have the peace now and the post-Cold War period. And these weapons in Europe and in Asia and in this country amount to billions and billions of dollars. And I'm afraid he's going to give some of them away to third world countries. That means they'll keep on using them for wars.
So they can fight among one another.
And also, I've found out since I've been in this part of the country that there's a great need for many of these trucks and graders and things that are in good condition, kept up well by the Army. They need them for roads. And one of the Hopkins County Commissioners, Mr. Prince, pointed out to me that not only for this county, but for counties all over the nation, the President should see that this surplus material is made available to the counties at a low rate.
I must admit that when television started, I had just come back to the United States. I'd been living in Peru with an airline and in the Air Force in Puerto Rico. And about the first thing I noticed in television when they started holding presidential press conferences, there was this lady who simply would not be denied the attention of the president, whoever he might be. And normally the president at that time would finally give up and recognize this lady and immediately be sorry that he did it. Am I talking about, I did not know who you, it was this, well, at that time I didn't know red-headed because it was black and white TV. Are you that lady, and have you been all the...
I am I. It is I.
You once said in an interview here, a radio interview at KSST, that the first president you covered was Roosevelt, that he terrified you. I think you used the word terrified.
Yes.
Was Roosevelt that overpowering, or were you a young girl and here's the giant or something?
Well, I was a young person, younger person, not so young, but younger person who just come out of the Army, where I had been so busy that I had not kept up with the news, and these giants of intellect were around me there, particularly Roosevelt, who was very smart. I knew from Tyler, Texas days when I worked on the newspaper, my father and I watched him, I know he was somewhat of a dictator. And I knew that he had given an Iron Cross to John O'Donnell of the New York Daily News, said the story he wrote was not in the interest of the war effort.
Yeah.
And he gave a dunce cap to Drew Pearson, a noted columnist, said he hadn't been helpful, and to go over there in the corner and stand with a dunce cap. So I was afraid of him, and I knew also that I didn't want to show my ignorance by asking a question that might be out of line.
At this point, a lady reporter was an almost unknown thing among the press corps.
There were several there.
Really?
May Craig of Maine Papers, she's no longer with us, a wonderful woman from South Carolina who worked for Maine. She was one of Roosevelt's favorites, and he gave her, there were only 6 seats, the rest of us were standing, and he gave her one of the 6 seats all the time. And then there was a woman named Doris Fleeson, a former syndicated writer. She was around somewhat, and Ruth Montgomery, but very few women.
Was not Roosevelt the first of the presidents to get into the, to establish the give and take, you guys come in, I'll talk to you format?
Yes, yes, he was. And he had many press conferences every week, and which was good, but being so crowded, standing in maybe 150 people in a little room, and we were riding on each other's backs. But, you know, they must have had good correction by Steve Early, the press secretary, after the press conference was over, because these men came out of there and they wrote the best copy with the best facts. Merriman Smith, who later got a prize for United Press International, for his writing under pressure, dictating under pressure, and he was terrific.
Interesting thing about Roosevelt, and again, I was growing up in the early Roosevelt years. I missed those during the war because I was out of the country. It came as a shock and a surprise to me, maybe a decade later, to learn that this man had polio, that this man could not walk. I stopped and reviewed my memory. Always we saw him standing, we saw him seated, and was it common knowledge in Washington that this man was crippled with polio, but the rest of the country did not know it, or was I leading a sheltered life?
His pictures did not show it. The pictures were, he arranged the pictures not to show it, and he didn't want it to be, he knew it was known, but he didn't, it had to be known, but he didn't play it up and he didn't talk about it. And he was very careful when he was standing up to have the pictures taken from the waist up.
Yeah.
But he was a giant, I'll tell you right now, in intellect, and he loved people. He had learned, I've been doing a lot of research on him lately, that's why I'm up on him, because I'm writing a book about what I remember about presidents. I was a very close friend of his secretary. She gave me a lot of information about him that I wouldn't have otherwise, Grace Tully. And they worked every night. You don't hear presidents today working until 12 and 1 o'clock in the White House.
He could hold his own with the media.
Oh,
he
definitely.
used
He
those
was above
fireside
the
chats.
He was above the media.
What, of the, how many, 10 presidents now?
This is the 10th.
Of the 10 presidents you have confronted, if you don't mind me using the word,
that's all right.
Of the 10 presidents you have confronted, who handled themselves best and who couldn't handle the media?
Well, Roosevelt handled them sort of as, I'm master, you people are slaves out there, you know. Kennedy was undoubtedly one of the best at handling the press. He was not afraid of them. Nixon, on the other hand, was afraid of them, and probably justly so, but Kennedy knew many of the press, and formally, socially, while he was a senator, entertained them in his home, and he also knew how to use them. You know, presidents do manage the news, there's no doubt about it. We have to admit that now.
Yeah. Was Roosevelt able, with his fireside chats, by whatever name, was he able to go direct to the people and perhaps have a more powerful influence over the Congress?
Definitely, and yet I think this was, I should tell you that the fireside chats were thought up by a vice president of CBS named...
Really?
Oh yes, he was a very fine man named Butch, I can't think of his last name.
Okay.
But he became, he convinced Roosevelt that he should do this, and he coached him on his talks, and his talks became so good. And Mrs. Roosevelt used to invite people to come in to sit as an audience to when he did those fireside chats.
You may be bouncing that microphone a little bit.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right. We're old friends around here. I have a problem. I've been off television so long, I have to remember not to pick my nose when I'm on camera. Hey, what about, why did he change? He changed vice presidents as often as some people change their underwear. He had, let's see, Henry Wallace. Man, there was a strange guy, wasn't he?
Yes.
Cactus Garner, a character if there ever was one. Maybe he had more.
Oh, well, he ended up with Truman.
Well, yeah, sure. I'd forgotten about that, obviously.
Yeah.
Why did he change vice presidents? Did he let the party pick them for him?
He picked them, apparently not knowing, and issues developed, situations developed, and he found out that the man he'd picked didn't fit in with the news of the day or with the needs of the day. Certainly Henry Wallace didn't. He was a great agriculturalist, a fine man, brilliant man in his field, but it didn't fit in with the war. And then he picked, and Garner didn't. Garner was not enough of a liberal to fit in with his philosophy, so he got rid of him. And Truman had been holding war investigations in the Senate. We investigated the preparedness of the nation. So Truman seemed to fit in better on that score, and Truman had been in the Army too.
I flew Wallace through South America in a trip during the war. I don't know whether you remember when he went down there and made the tour of South America or not. A strange and different type of man. Of course, he later ran for president and on an independent ticket, if I remember correctly.
His daughter is in Washington today. She's one of the wealthiest women in Washington.
Really?
And she's there and goes to, she and her husband appear at many social functions.
He was an unusual man. In the trip to South America, he brushed up on his Spanish before he left, used it through South America. He every morning would jog by the side of the limousine to the airport.
Even then, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then in the evenings, wherever he was in South America, he would get, usually the hotel would be off a plaza, he would get out and throw his boomerangs. Now, this was a different type of man, Henry Wallace was. But Harry Truman took over late in the war. Let me tell you this, and perhaps it will set the scene for what I'd like for you to tell me. I got back about that time to the United States. I rather despised Harry Truman. I thought, this man is a disgrace to the presidency. He's no president. He's a banty rooster. But do you know, as the years go by, his stature, to my way of thinking, increases to the point where I have decided this banty rooster may have been one of the great presidents. He did a couple of fascinating things. What I thought was the persecution of that poor general when he brought him back now turns out simply to be a president making a statement. Look at the Constitution and find out who's supposed to run the Army. Tell me, am I right about this? Was I wrong about this man?
No,
and am I right about it?
Your opinion was shared by most people of the country at that time. They snubbed, they turned up their noses at Truman. They thought it was ridiculous. Then they finally had to realize what and how powerful man he was, and a strong man, and a strong personality, and a human being. And now, people, I went to a birthday, 103rd birthday party for him the other day, and there were people there from all over the nation. Some of them still in office, the judges that he had appointed, and that I talked to, I think, Ch18 in New York, and they were just singing his praises, and everybody there was. And I found out that what I didn't know, that Truman helped start the community college system. But Truman was, tell you, Truman did something that I can't understand. When he made up his mind to drop the bomb on
Hiroshima,
he said he slept that night. Somebody asked him. India Edwards, a woman, a former newspaper woman who was with the Democratic National Committee, who personally urged him to run for re-election. And she pushed him on and told him she had made a survey and she found out he could win. But she asked him, how did you sleep after dropping that bomb? He said, I slept beautifully. He said, after I make up my mind, I don't go back on it. And I don't understand that, because I've changed my mind a lot.
He's a fascinating man. He was a reader, an avid reader. His vocabulary reading was better than his pronunciations
Yes.
were, which is the sign of someone who reads almost constantly. He was a student of the Constitution, a student of history, and sat around, and you perhaps could confirm this with me, and sat around at night in the White House sipping good bourbon and playing poker with the boys.
Well, you know, he didn't want to deal with the lobbyist from Kansas City, who was a Jewish fellow. He wanted to stay away from him because he knew he was working for Israel to come about, and he didn't want to be influenced by this man. He thought it would be better if he made up his mind without being influenced. But finally he did talk to the man, and Truman really is the man who is responsible for there being a state of Israel today. And I don't know why they leave that out of the accounts of his life.
We're going to run forever. I've got a long list of people I want to get your impression of. Without getting nosy about your personal likes and dislikes, do you have problems covering? You seem to give all presidents a hard time, but some of them you have a real affection for. Do you have a problem covering a president you just don't like?
I do. Well, I haven't. There hasn't been anyone that I just didn't. I tell you what happens to me. When I see them running for office and I hear all about them, I get enthusiastic. And many of us do. I guess that's a mass media complex or something. But anyway, after they get into office, I don't like any of them. I don't like what they do. I'm sorry for them. I'm disgusted. And I liked George Bush personally before he got there. And now in office, I don't care for his operations at all. But it was the same way with other presidents. I don't know why. I guess it's because they have to make up their minds on issues in a different way after they're president than maybe they did as an individual.
Eisenhower, the peaceful years,
Well,
did he luck out or did he do it that way? He ran the presidency a little bit different from others.
well, he ran it differently because he didn't know a thing about government except the Army until he got there. And he had to learn and he tried to study, but he had such a sense of responsibility to the American people that he made himself give these regular press conferences when he didn't like press conferences. There's no Army man likes the press. And he didn't want to do this, but he thought he should report. And I think that's very admirable of a man to do. The more I read about Eisenhower, the more I study about him, and I read from my own notes as I wrote this book in '78 about him. I wrote a book about several presidents, and he among them, but I have more respect for him the more I look at him. The more I hear about what he did, I have more respect for him.
Sort of like Harry Truman is growing on me, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay. Eisenhower, as a military man, of course, knew how to develop military staffs. Was his staff a pretty good operation, do you know?
In
do
the
you
White
remember?
House?
Yes.
Oh, I think so, and he did an amazing thing. You know, Eisenhower had a man called Sherman Adams, who was definitely, he had set himself up as the assistant president. Something unusual in our history, but he had managed to do this, and he actually was pulling the stunts of being assistant president. He was so close to Eisenhower that he thought he ought to room in the suite with him when at the hotels, and he pushed Mamie, Mrs. Eisenhower, out. So she got to the next place where she managed to get her luggage in there first and pushed him out, and I don't blame her. But he did an amazing thing to Sherman Adams. I asked a question on the, I was told by an editor I had in New England, William Loeb, to ask a question about a man named Goldfein in Boston, an industrialist, who was getting vicuna coats, who was giving vicuna coats to Sherman Adams, and rugs, and gifts, and said, why is he giving these gifts to Adams, who's so powerful at the White House? When I asked the question, Jim Hagerty, the press officer, said, that couldn't be true, that couldn't be true, but I'll look into it. And everybody else thought I was terrible, mean for asking the question of such a great man as Sherman Adams. Eisenhower looked into it, asked him about it. He said, is this true? And Sherman Adams said, yes. He said, go out to the Congress and tell them the truth. They want to investigate you. Go out there and tell them. And he did what many presidents will stand by a man regardless. And he didn't. He let Sherman Adams go out there, and Sherman Adams testified about this. Sherman Adams was never heard from anymore. He had to resign.
By this time, the press conference is becoming a tradition. Television is insinuating itself across the nation. Are you at this time, by the Eisenhower years, in on all the press conferences, and are you beginning to get the attention of presidents?
Well, it's funny. I got to the first Eisenhower press conference too late to be sitting on the floor, and had it in the treaty room in the executive office building. He had a balcony around the top, and I had to go up to the balcony to stand. I thought, oh dear, I wanted to ask this man a question at his first press conference, but I won't get to. I'll be up in the balcony. And I leaned over and asked someone, can I ask from up here? They said, no, nobody ever has, nobody ever would. So he gave not a press conference, he gave a statement, and says he was getting ready to leave, and I hollered down from upstairs and said, Mr. President, is this going to be the format for all your press conferences, or are we going to be able to ask you more questions? Well, of course, it created a stir, this voice from the top, and he stopped and he thought, and he said, well, yes, you can ask questions. So from then on, I got there early, and May Craig from Maine, she sat on one side and I on the other, to a second or third seat. We could pick our own seats then at that time. Now we assigned seats at each press conference. So when he would get mad when we'd ask him something that would imply that he hadn't made a perfect decision. He wanted to appear perfect to everybody. You could see this vein artery up here in his temples pulsating, you know. We knew he was about to blow. He had an early fuse.
Yeah.
And Mamie always tried to keep him from getting angry because she knew this. But anyway, he would get so mad and puff up and look so mad when he'd have to answer the questions that people said I was trying to give him a heart attack. I wasn't trying to. I just was trying to get a question in. But you know, he was so poor on use of words that we'd have to go back and study later to see what he said. But the best thing, one of the things, one time they were studying Nixon.
Don't mess with the microphone.
Yeah, they were studying Nixon, trying to figure out if they would have Nixon on the ticket for the second time.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, we hadn't heard anything about Nixon, but all of a sudden the front pages were having stories about how Nixon did this and Nixon did that, and I got sick of it. So I went to the press conference and I said, would you please tell us some of the policy decisions that Nixon has participated in? He said, no, I can't think of any. And later on in the press conference, Mr. Moore spoke up from another paper and said, Mr. President, can't you think of anything? And he said, well, give me a week and I'll think of something.
I remember.
The Democratic National Committee put these two questions on a sheet and put it out across the country during the campaign.
This might be a good time to ask that question. I think the first vice president the United States ever had made some sort of an eloquent statement about it being the most inconsequential office ever created, devised in by any government or something like that.
Well, you know what Garner said about it.
I wonder, yes, and I've been wondering if that warm bucket was really what Garner said, or if perhaps they cleaned it up a little bit.
It was bad enough as it was. It sounded just like Garner.
Oh, it did? Okay, so presidents, do they deliberately keep the vice president hidden? Do vice presidents simply not get the coverage? I can't even remember our vice president's name.
Well, because they thought the country was in a bad situation in World War II. Roosevelt had not kept Truman advised of secret decision making, and the country was so worried about that there was an effort been made ever since to try to keep the vice president informed. And Kennedy tried his best. He created a space council position for Lyndon Johnson, and they try to make it appear that they are keeping the vice president informed, and they push him forward and try to give him more stature. Now, Bush has been particularly good about trying to give stature to this inconsequential man named Dan Quayle, and he can't make him into a big figure, but he's trying to. And but he does keep him informed by having weekly lunches with him.
Did he pick Dan Quayle to find somebody nobody could find that much fault with?
God knows. Nobody really knows why he picked Dan Quayle, but my feeling is this. Bush needed somebody to boost his ego. At that time, he was morale. He needed somebody to boost him. And Quayle used to go and visit Bush, I understand, and look up at him and say, you great, big, fine man, sure you're doing the right job. And Bush needed somebody who wouldn't be a rival for him. And, you know, Reagan was worried about the rivalry, too. That's why he named Bush. He was about to name Ford. He was afraid Jerry Ford would be, as a vice president, would be too much of a rival. So Quayle, I think, was picked, though, because he was working largely on the Contras in Central America.
Okay.
He had a man from his state named John Hull, who was a rancher down in Costa Rica. And Cole used to spend a lot of time in Quayle's office as senator. And Quayle had a man in there named Rob Owen, who later went to the White House to work with Oliver North. I think Dan Quayle was definitely deep into the Contra operations, and that's another reason why Bush named him.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy. You seem to consider him one of the great presidents, seem to have a personal affection for him. Playing devil's advocate, Sarah, he wasn't in that long. He got assassinated like Lincoln, and that sort of places him in a special stature where we do not pick on these poor martyrs.
Well, I don't think he was I don't think that we look to Kennedy as highly as we do because of his untimely death as much as we do what he did while he was there. He showed promise. He outlined things he wanted to do, which Lyndon Johnson fortunately did proceed with. Head Start and a Peace Corps and things like that Lyndon Johnson kept on. But we know this from Kennedy. Kennedy started these ideas. He had leadership. He really did. I regret that he didn't have longer time in office to put more of these ideas into effect.
I want to follow up on that in a minute if we don't completely run out of time and battery and everything. Are you doing fine? Are you enjoying this?
I'm really enjoying it very much. I could go on forever.
Okay, we may do that, or we may finish it and come back sometime on your 90th birthday. On Kennedy, let me see, there was something, oh yeah. Can you remember an incident where you and Kennedy had a confrontation, an exchange? Tell us something about an event that you would remember with
Well,
Kennedy.
I got so much mail after this, I had to bring in volunteers to help me answer the mail. But anyway, I found out by some good friends of mine on Capitol Hill who were working on committees that there were investigations being made of two men. For some reason or other, these two men were being investigated for the organizations they belonged to, and one was being investigated for his record. He was a Cuban named William Arthur Whelan who had changed his name and who was a high official in the State Department. And there was another man named Ch18 Miller who was being investigated by the committee in the House for many organizations that he belonged to. It may have been perfectly innocent, both of them, but they were named by they were not security cleared. They had not been cleared for security.
Okay.
They were named suddenly by Kennedy to reorganize the innermost office of the State Department, the Office of Management that handles security and our spy list and everything. Why? And the people at the Hill who were investigating these men and knew their record couldn't understand why Kennedy had picked them for that. Well, anyway, when they told me about it, I checked it as much as I could until the last minute of the press conference. And I said, why did you name these two men to that office? And Kennedy was furious, and he said I was wrong, and in saying that they had not been security proof, and would I name them? And I did name them. And Kennedy was very upset with that, and the three networks were broadcast networks went off the air. Two of them came back later. They got Pierce Salinger cut the press conference off as soon as possible in the State Department, had a press conference with the wire service men warning them if they mentioned these men's names they would be sued for libel. Then they had a press conference with the press office of the State Department to say I was wrong, the men had not been given this job and they were not doing this, and I shouldn't have asked this question. And I went to the press conference and asked the press officer, I said, do you remember I called you at home last night at 10 o'clock and asked you if these men had this job, and you said yes? Kennedy found out he had given orders for them to be cleared, marked as cleared for security, but that had not been done. He found out about it on his way back to the White House from the place of the press conference. He was so mad that his staff was scared of him. And from then on, we had it round and round, and the men were pulled out of this office, but they were allowed to stay in the press office. One was sent to Australia, and one was allowed in some non-important office to stay on until they retired.
Yeah.
Only this year, that was '62, this year I had a letter from Ch18 Miller telling me how bad it was unjustly it was that I used his name, and that he was innocent and I should never have asked the question. I felt sorry about him.
Did Kennedy carry the grudge? Did this change the relationship? Did you get recognized afterwards?
Not for quite a while. His staff aides told him that he must not call on me. Finally, he's alleged to have told someone that I have to call on her. I'm just curious to know what she's going to ask. And they were taking bets down at the press club as to when he would call on me again. But finally he did.
Nixon. We've got to move ahead. Did Nixon get what he asked for? Did Nixon accidentally end up at the wrong place at the wrong time? Did Nixon suddenly wake up some morning and find it is too late, this thing has gone too far, it's out of hand? Talk to me about Nixon.
Nixon was like Johnson. They'd been poor and they wanted power and they wanted security. Nixon, I think he must have been more worried about he had a brother who was kind of involved in some things. He wanted to know what the Democrats were doing, naturally.
Yeah.
But it was too bad. Nixon was a smart man and very good on foreign policy. He knew personally 60 heads of state whom he had personally visited when he went in the White House. Nixon was not a bad man, and I don't know what happened to him about it. It was very bad judgment that he went through with. But Goldwater is the man who went down to the White House and told Nixon that he had to resign because he didn't have support in Congress anymore and wouldn't have. If I'd been Nixon, I would have fought it because I don't think he would have been impeached. But he left, and now people say nasty things about Nixon and write him off as being all bad. That's certainly not true. He wasn't all bad. There are a lot of good things about Nixon. And actually, when he was in there, he did a lot of good things.
I think someone had punned about Ford, who was never elected in any sense of the word, other than to the Congress, that he should be addressed as your accidency.
Oh, that's
what about Ford? Should Ford have pardoned Nixon, number one? Number two, he had a brief time. Had he been elected in his own right, would he have made a good president, or should we simply be curious about what sort of a president would he have made? Talk to me a little about Ford. And did you have any relationships with Ford?
Yes, I knew Ford very well because I'd known him in Congress. I covered a lot of Texans, and Texans were very delighted with their friendship with Ford because Ford was always strong on national defense. I helped the Texans get at their military installations, which they needed. We had great respect for Ford. Once I started to run for Congress, and I asked Ford, I said, if I run on the Republican ticket, will you give me some money from your campaign chest? No, he said. He was horrified. He would not, but that didn't make any difference. I never thought he would be picked for president. But he was more or less a man who was not a top leader type. He was more or less the background clerk type. He knew Congress, knew it so well. He could not become Speaker of the House because of the Republican minority, but I think that's why he was so hard on Congress when he got in there. I think Ford didn't do a good job in Congress because he kept putting off questions. Big controversial issues would come up. Energy, for example. They changed the name of the energy agency over and over again. Ford put off decision making. I think he was waiting till he was elected and planned to do a lot more when he was elected, but never got the chance.
Why did Carter beat him?
Carter sort of went to the people and talked to the people, and when he spoke to the National Press Club early in the campaign, I said, that man's going to be elected president.
Really?
Yeah, I predicted it, and I'm glad I did, but his wife was a marvelous campaigner. They were person-to-person types of people, and they appealed to people, little people.
Will he go down in history as president of what's his name? Is his stature going to improve as many have?
Carter. I don't think his record as president will improve, but already his character and stature have improved worldwide because he is now sort of a citizen of the world, helping in a humanitarian way and doing great things for people.
Reagan.
A funny man. Reagan was a very likable person, but do you know Reagan came into the Republican Party with certain... he was the child, he was a prodigy of a group of rich people in California who'd been working for years to make him president. And they didn't know anything about government, and they didn't care. And they had preconceived businessmen's notions that all welfare recipients were frauds, things like that, that they told him what to do. And he went along with them. And he was really a marvelous actor, a marvelous personal, likable man, but he was nobody to be president. He did not know enough about government, and he didn't know how to make decisions in the presidency.
Was he similar to Ike in that there was a sort of a bond of affection between him and the public? The public just sort of liked these two people.
That's right. That's very true. And they used this. And Reagan had the, it was a bounce back from Carter that so many retired military men who were professionals came forward. Many professionals in Hollywood and in public relations came forward to help Reagan. And that army of professional public relations people put Reagan over. And they used Carter because they hated Carter. They thought Carter was cutting back too much on defense.
Read my lips, no new taxes. Did that hurt George Bush?
No, it helped him. It helped him a lot. It helped make him president. And
well, I mean, when suddenly we read his lips and he was saying, well, maybe.
In a way, I think we should give George Bush credit for finding out that he'd done something that didn't suit the times, and he changed. I think that's all right for him to change. As to whether or not we should have new taxes, that's another issue. I maintain we shouldn't have more new taxes. But George Bush thought that the times required him to change, and he had the bigness to do it.
Is there something about presidents? I cannot remember back an occasion where a president has stood up and said, I blew it. That was a mistake. I have changed my mind. Is there something in the book of how to be a president that says you just cannot do that? Somehow I feel that there would be more respect for the man.
There should be more respect for the man, and I think that's an indication of greatness. And I think that's the type of thing that Lincoln would have done.
Mm. Did Congress really mean it when it passed Graham-Rudman? Did they really sincerely think, or were they just trying to avoid this Constitutional Convention confrontation?
Like the rest of us, they didn't know enough about economics to know what they were doing. They didn't know enough about budgets, and they thought that was a great thing to do. And they still, according to Phil Graham, the senator from Texas, Republican, he thinks it's a great thing. And apparently it's a very restrictive thing, and it's very hard on us. And we should stop the spending. But we should stop the spending not on the backs of women and children and poor single mothers and elderly. We should stop the spending where we should stop it, in the Defense Department, where we were buying weapons that with unproven quality, and sometimes weapons that cost the lives of our soldiers. And we should stop it by some of the tomfoolery spending that we're engaged in that people don't even know about. Some peculiar research. You know, the professional grant applicants can get more money out of the federal government on some unnecessary research, and they do it all the time. If they know how to write those grant applications, well, they can get more money.
I think you'd also tell me the same thing about the Endowment for the Arts, or whatever it's called.
Oh gosh, the Endowment for the Arts has done more, and the Endowment for the Humanities also. They've done some good things, but they've done some very foolish, silly things. Some of the grants they give money for from humanities for poetry, like I would have left out of the tile of paper when I was society editor.
Private lives, public lives. I asked you this last night, and you gave me a quick off-the-cuff answer. I know what it is, but let's get back into it. There are probably as many skeletons in presidential closets as there was junk in Fibber McGee's closet, dating back to Harding at least, and probably before.
Yes.
Roosevelt's disability was a near secret. Book writers and publicity seekers disclosing private lives. Is there any right to privacy with a president or a congressman?
I've thought about this a long time. When you ask me that question, I can tell you they have no right to privacy. If they offer themselves to us as our representative and our top public servant, we should know all about them, what they're likely to do. I was on a board once picking Army officers. And let me tell you something, the way the Army picks its officers is very good. They figure out everything this man might do under certain conditions. So they have to know all of the causes and effects in his character in order to figure out what he might do. And therefore, we should do the same with presidents. We should know everything.
Okay.
He's no right to privacy when he offers himself as a president.
So you would have been right with the bunch blowing the whistle on Gary Hart.
Why, certainly. Suppose that man had gotten in the White House and then been blackmailed by some Soviet spy. He could have been.
Would you have blown the whistle on Kennedy?
I would have if I'd known about it. I had no idea in the world that Kennedy, whom I respected very much, I had no idea he was engaged in all of this
Was it common
sexual
knowledge?
life. No, it was not common knowledge. And any reporter who tells you they knew about it, suspect them. There were about two reporters in Washington who knew it, and one, of course, was Ben Bradley, because he was very close to Kennedy, and he had family connections. He had he knew friends who were very close with Kennedy. But other people did not know it, and it never got in the paper. What little bit was known about Kennedy never got in the paper. And I'll point out to you, you know, Roosevelt had a relationship that didn't get in the paper either with
Yes.
Lucy Rutherford, and reporters did know about that, and they kept that out. I didn't know about it.
Eisenhower.
Eisenhower had undoubtedly a great relationship with this girl who was a British woman who became a women army source. She was his driver. And he had a great relationship with her. I don't know whether it was, I know one woman who knew them very well, who roomed with this girl, told me that it was certainly an infatuation of the two for each other. And I don't know whether it was other things or not. It may have been. She was a very skilled driver, and Eisenhower needed a good driver in blacked out London. And she was always prompt and always on time and adored him. And I don't know, but he was nasty to her. When after the war was over, and he was in a high spot in Washington, in the Pentagon, and she came over here looking for a job, he was nasty to her, and he told some of his generals, as a general nearby told me, not to give her any special attention.
People. Cactus Jack. We mentioned him, a character. I have the feeling he was the type of man, you ask a straight question, you get a straight answer. Is that rare in Washington?
That's exactly right, and he was not polished at all. He was the rough, diamond rough, and he certainly drank an awful lot of whiskey. One young fellow told me he went up to deliver something to him, and Garner said, "Do you want a drink?" And Garner poured a drink. But he had many good qualities, earthy qualities of the people, and he simply didn't fit in with Hyde Park Roosevelt.
Dirksen of the Gravel Voice.
Wonderful man, delightful man, but oh, did he and I have an experience one time. Dirksen was reading off these people who should be pushed out of the press gallery because they were tasked, for example. He didn't want TASS, a Russian agency, to be in the press gallery. And he read the alphabetical list of those at the press gallery down a little too far. He came beyond TASS, he came to the Temple Telegram. And he read off the Temple Telegram as one of those people, their correspondent should be evicted from the press gallery. Well, that was I.
Yeah.
I'm still the correspondent for the Temple Telegram in Temple, Texas. That was so many years ago. Anyway, when I walked in the gallery after lunch, everybody was nervous and looked at me, Sarah, did you know what happened? What happened? I said, no. Berkson just read off your name as one who should be expelled from here because you were communist and covered for a communist paper. I said, what? And I went downstairs and called him out where the reporters could call out people from the Senate floor.
Yeah.
I asked for Dirksen to come out right away. And I said, I'm going to kick him in the mouth. I'm going to kick him in the mouth. And I was about that high. He's a big, tall man. Somebody said, I don't think you can reach him. Anyway, he was scared to come off the Senate floor and see me. He wouldn't.
Yeah.
He was scared to death. He went to my senator, who was then Tom Connolly of Texas, and said, Tom, please plead for me. Then I ran into Russell Long, the senator from Louisiana, and I was telling Russell my troubles. Russell said, Sarah, forget about it. I wouldn't worry about it. But he was a delightful character. You know, he's the man who said, $1 billion here and $1 billion there, and pretty soon it's real money.
You were talking about real money, yeah. Mr. Sam.
Oh, he was a strange character. I have more and more respect for Sam Rayburn all the time, but he wasn't nice to me. He was he did a very terrible thing to me one time. 40 men in there and me, and I had been pushing him for a reply for a letter on trade. What would we do with wool? We wanted to sell our wool, and we were having a hard time getting it into the world market. And Sam was for free trade, and the wool people always wanted protection, you know. So I said, what about this letter you've been asked for the wool people to do something? And finally he said, I will now reply to you. You've been asking me forever about this letter. He said, I will tell you that I have your letter before me. I have your letter behind me. I will pull the chain. That was terrible. That was from his days of living up here in Bonham, where they did have chains on toilets. Yeah. And I was so embarrassed. But you know, Truman, Rabin was the one man who got us the money for the atomic bomb. He went before Congress and said, just give, you're supposed to justify everything, but just take my word for it. We need the money. But he could never understand the press. He would tell me, that's off the record, you can't use that. And then he'd go right upstairs to the radio gallery and put it on the air. But he's a great man. He's a wonderful man. He loved his country.
Good grief, I left out Lyndon Baines, but we will get to him in just a moment. Before,
well, there's so much on Lyndon Baines.
Before we do that, here we got two, we've got two interesting men, both Texans. We got Mr. Sam. We've got LBJ. Let me ask you, one a president, another the Speaker of the House. Who runs this country?
Well,
who are the powers?
They are. They are very, very powerful, and they were then, and they should be, because they're separate from the president. The president has too much power. We have given him in recent years more power than he should have. We've made him a king, a dictator, and we should keep more power in the Congress, because that offsets the president and lets the people's representatives talk.
Is it true that Mr. Sam, after it was all over for a day on a major issue, could call in a few of the key boys, sit around the office, a little bourbon and branch water, and solve things there as opposed to on the floor?
They did it all the time, over and over again. And Sam had more influence over Lyndon. Lyndon was, but I'll tell you what happened. Lyndon was using his weight when he got to be majority leader of the Senate. And he said, I will decide who gets a license for a radio station in Texas, or a TV station. I will be the one to decide. And,
yeah, this was clout.
And so a man who was trying to get his license renewed and couldn't because he wasn't too close to Lyndon came to Washington to see what could be done about it, and he went to Mr. Sam, and he told Mr. Sam what Lyndon was doing, and Mr. Sam said Lyndon shouldn't do that.
This is
and he stopped Lyndon from doing that.
This is a little bit scary, because do not I remember that Nixon, when he was trying to defend himself, suggested in a staff meeting, and this is perhaps something on the tapes, that the FCC could get that newspaper's television station in trouble. I think it was somebody in Florida.
Absolutely. That's bad. That's terrible.
Let's get back on something as a matter of curiosity. You and I am sure have both looked at people and said, what sort of a president would he have made? I'm thinking, let me, just to be sure I'm not showing any prejudices, let's pick two diametrically opposite people. Wouldn't it have been fascinating to have found out what sort of a president Barry Goldwater or Adlai Stevenson would have made?
Yes, it would have been fascinating, but I think that Barry Goldwater would have made a very fine president. He's a very good man, and I worry about the fact that the good men who didn't make it. I'll tell you one good man who didn't make it. You might not agree with me, but all he wanted to do was serve his country, and that was Rockefeller.
Yeah.
He wanted so hard just to serve his country, and he would have made a wonderful president, I think.
Well, a man with that kind of money doesn't have an axe to grind. He has nothing else to prove.
Well, that was one thing good about Kennedy. Kennedy didn't owe the bank any money, and therefore he had the nerve to lead, to initiate new things.
Okay, I left out LBJ. We have sort of talked about around the fringes about this man. Somehow, behind all the bluster, behind all the wheeling dealing, this man was a powerful force.
Yes.
He probably would have been best remembered had he left the presidency alone.
No, I don't think he would have been remembered at all had he left it alone.
Really?
He tried, yeah, he debated so long, and I was with him much at that time, as to whether to run for president or not. And he wanted it so badly, but he was timid about it, and he waited too long to get started that year. So Kennedy already had the delegates lined up and already had the votes before that 1960 period.
Did Lyndon want to be loved?
Oh, he wanted to be loved the worst in the world. He wanted everybody to love him, and that was one reason why he did so many things in a peculiar way. He really he didn't want to be by himself ever, and he wanted people around him, and he wanted to be loved.
I want to talk about reporters a little bit. You have seen reporters in Washington, White House level, all the way from the 1890s. No, all the way from FDR to the present day. First of all, have presidents changed? Have reporters changed? Is there that much difference between the first president you confronted and the last president you confronted?
Yes, I think presidents go and come. They change quite a bit, and reporters change. Reporters generally are more powerful these days. Reporters were not trying to be powerful in Roosevelt's day. They were just trying to be, to cover this man. They were in awe of Roosevelt, and completely in awe of him. But now, ever since Nixon's day, reporters have been much harder and stronger on a president, and they should be. They're not strong enough. Reporters have a bad thing of a president comes out and announces something, they have to take it right away. They have to be a reporter. But they don't do research then on the background of this decision enough. They don't have time, as a matter of fact. We need more reporters.
Peter Jennings had some nice things to say about you on ABC TV, and I think he was being something other than just a television talking head. In print media, Georgia Ann Geyer, if I'm pronouncing it right, defended you.
Yes, that's right.
Whom do you most respect among the television and the print media reporters and columnists?
Helen Thomas. She's a wonderful woman. She's got nerves. She's our front person today, confronting George Bush and getting an insult nearly every day from him because of her persistence in asking questions. And Sam Donaldson, I have great respect for both his ability and his persistence. And they have some very good reporters there.
Let's chop it for a moment and end it, start rolling.
Okay, I'm going.
I'm assuming that we're going to edit this before it's all over. I hope we're not running out of tape or battery or anything like that, because this could go on and on. Next time you're around, you're going to come back and we'll cover all of these questions that we forgot to cover this time. You wondered if Wright-Patman was before my time. Let me tell you a couple of reporters sharing a story. No, Wright was not before my time. I knew him well.
So did I.
He was an interesting and a different person. Wright had developed the politician's knack better than anybody I ever interviewed, and I used to challenge that man. I would ask him a question he could not evade, and he would discuss it with me. I would go home satisfied until I listened and found that he had simply discussed my question. He had not answered it. He was, and I don't know whether it was because he was getting elderly at the time,
no,
but
he was
his
skillful.
obsession,
His
obsession in his later years with the Fed. I could ask any question,
brother,
and sooner or later it would be the fault of the Fed. Did you know the man that well?
I certainly did. I've got a file on him this thick at home, and I hope before I die to write a book on him.
Really?
He was one of the most marvelous men that we've ever had in politics. Talented and versatile, and worked on so many different subjects. And what he said about the Fed, if we had just listened to Wright-Patman and checked on the foundations and where their money was going and worked on the Fed and that little committee that he kept talking about in the Fed that always knew ahead, made the policy, and then told their relatives when they went home. And this little group mounted, and they had more and more people who knew the inside of what was going on. If we listened to Wright-Patman, we probably wouldn't have had the S&Ls.
Okay, you are an announced declared Democrat. Does this influence your reporting? Does this influence your reporting? Do you take out after Democrats too?
Well, I'll tell you, for one thing, I have always had some very good friends among the Republican Party, and especially in Congress, and I was one of those who takes credit for giving publicity. It was not publicity, it was news. I covered news of Republican women when they started trying to make Texas a two-party state, and I helped them by publicizing their news when they came to Washington. One of my best friends is a former national chairman, of the Republican National Committee of Texas.
You want to say something
Jack
nice?
Porter.
Yeah, you want to say something nice about Jim Chapman, which he will probably want me to use in his commercials?
Well, I like Jim Chapman very much because he's using a wide approach to his congressional job.
Yeah.
He's saying that I must help the people with their needs. He's getting 200 calls a week, I understand, for personal problems, which many congressmen are getting a lot of calls on personal problems. But he says, I must not only help these people with their present-day needs, but I must try to develop new industry for my district. And that's as much a part of my job as anything. And he's working now on waterways and on the water channel to Dangerfield and trying to get more trade to get into the Red River. And I said, well, Mr. Chapman, they did this during the Civil War. They used it mightily then to get cotton down to the Southerners. Well, of course it's a good idea.
At the time this is being recorded, the day this is being recorded, which is Saturday, July the 28th, the President has just tossed the Senate another piece of raw meat. Are they going to chew this Supreme Court nominee up and spit him out like they did Bork? What is going on here? You and I think, share a view that the story of the importance and the confrontations over the mind of the Supreme Court is an important thing.
Absolutely.
What's are they going to chew this one up too?
Yes, they are, and they should. They will not be. They'll be derelict in their duty if they don't. This man will have a lot to do with our lives and the future of our lives and our children, and we should know more about this man before we give him that right. They may eventually confirm him. They probably will confirm him, but I will say that there will be many, many questions and many challenges, and we wouldn't be doing our part as citizens if we didn't do this.
Were you around when Roosevelt tried to stack the Supreme Court?
I surely was, and people were so burned up about that. I lived in East Texas then, and I know how burned up they were.
For the benefit of the kids around here, and we have two of them in the studio, for the benefit of the kids around here, Roosevelt needed to change the philosophy of the Supreme Court to get many of his ideas across. They would not die on him. And so he decided that the thing to do was to enlarge it. Do you remember how many more justices he wanted?
Well, he had to give in. I know that he finally had to give in.
He was going to enlarge the Supreme Court, and the word was stack the court.
Yeah.
Okay, Roosevelt, I hate terms, but you got to use it. Roosevelt was a liberal. And so we find this liberal Mr. Roosevelt. You can define him later if you want. I'm going to ask you what you are in a minute. Roosevelt was a liberal, and so he was promoting a liberal philosophy on the court. We turn around now, and we're finding that today, those who basically are conservative, and you can define that too if you want to, are trying to stack the court. Of course, they're doing it by replacing what attrition does to the court. But at that point, go ahead. What were you going to say about Roosevelt? I don't think you like my expression liberal.
Roosevelt worked, he had one of the most difficult jobs that ever was. He had the Depression, and it was a terrible thing. We had to try new forms of government. And I talked to the senator and his wife from Texas, Maury Shepard, who were there in the audience when he declared the moratorium with the banks. And they said it was a wonderful thing that he did, and it was a great thing. But he had the Depression and the war. Mm-hmm. And he simply had more reforms in our social life, our government life, our welfare system, everything, to deal with than anybody else. And he had to do something to help people. And when he tried new forms, because it was a different thing than we'd done before, why, if we'd let it be status quo, we would have been worse off. We'd have gone down the drain. But when he tried new forms, they said he was being a liberal. Now, if that's being, maybe that is being a liberal. But Roosevelt, I found out when he was governor of New York, he would always ride out among the people. He would go to the place where the homeless and the jobless were and talk to them. He would talk to the blacks. He talked to the servants. He got a lot of his ideas from servants. And he developed this compassion for people when he did that.
Are you a liberal or conservative?
I'm a people person. I hate labels and I hate terms, and somebody called me a conservative when I first came to Washington, and I lost several jobs over because people said I was a hardline conservative. But I find out now people are saying that I'm a liberal, but I'm much more of a liberal than the average liberal, because I am for new forms like Roosevelt did then. I'm for people. I know that we need changes in our lives and to help people live a better life, and I'm for that.
You are 80 years old. I am 70 years old, or will be in a matter of just a few weeks now. I have sort of decided that the morning that I wake up and I really do not feel an enthusiasm for getting out and doing my job is the time to check it to them. When do you think, what's going to be your sign that, hey, it's time to check it to them?
Well, right now I can't wait to get out of bed. I'm bored. I'm bored with the sleep period and make myself stay in bed sometimes longer than I should. But I can't do as much physically. I don't do as much, turn out as much copy. But
you do a 1 hour give and take interview with me.
Well, I tell you, I'm got lots of things to do yet, so I don't know when I'll check out. I guess I'll check out when I have to check out. That'll be what I'll do. I'll just go till I die. And I'm trying to keep my body so that I won't check out.
Let's wrap it. You're going to come back?
Sure, anytime. You're so good at pulling out things that I'd forgotten about and making me tell things that I'm still trying to explain to people, big government, and I'd like to work with you a lot of times.
Good. I hope you write that other book. The book you wrote a couple of years ago, don't we need to sort of put in a subscript on it to cover two more presidents?
I'm updating it, and it's going to be a lot better book than that book because I was influenced by some editors on that book and what to leave in and put out, and I'm deep into this book already. I was writing 2 or 3, I thought I didn't know enough about Roosevelt, and I've written 35 pages on Roosevelt. I'll have 100 and something pages on Lyndon Johnson.
Is the other one still in print?
No, it's not in print. We have a hard time finding it. I found one copy here yesterday while I was here.
Oh, I wish I had a copy. I hope I get a copy.
Well, I got a copy of it here. Picked it up from somebody's attic.
Sarah McClendon, this is the first interview on the new Channel 18, and of course we're using this for radio as well. I'm just wondering what in the world I'm going to do for an encore. Thank you.
Thank you. You're very nice. Well, you'll think of something.